So I'm just going to give a 2-3 minute intro, mostly to say, do a little bit of housekeeping, but mostly to welcome everybody. We've got a really great group here that covers law firm practitioners, folks in the corporations, service providers, consulting. So it's a really good mix of folks. And thanks so much everybody for making the effort on a very cold, bad traffic morning in the Bay Area. So I know a lot of you, not all of you. I'm Christian Lawrence. I'm the CEO of SFL Data. We've been building this company now the last 8 years or so, and we exist to help law firms and corporations with the process of eDiscovery. I'm not going to introduce this esteemed panel. We have 2 esteemed panels. I'm going to leave that to Dan, but I am going to introduce Dan. Dan, we've been very fortunate to have in the company for the last couple of years as an advisor, board advisor. He was previously the general counsel at Oracle and then Apple, and now does a lot of fun things from teaching at the business school at Stanford, the law school at Stanford, sits on a number of boards. He's involved with Bingham McCutchen in various capacities. So a wonderful guy, and he will keep us all on track. And thanks hugely to both sets of panelists for getting involved today. I'm not going to talk a ton about the content, but suffice to say, it's a very interesting time we live in, right? We live in the era of big data. I think that I read somewhere that data growth this year was 70% on prior year, and data proliferation into the types is dramatic. You almost can't go through a day of looking at the journal and not see a company that's dealing in some way with big data. And it's very fun to be building a company and dealing with that problem. And today is really about talking about that problem, obviously with regards to eDiscovery. So please use today as a chance to learn something. It's all about educating, and we hope that through the 2 panels and through the conversations, you take away 1, 2, 3 things that are really of value to you, and also have a chance to talk with each other. Last thing, so the agenda is going to be 2 1-hour panels. We're going to run them right after one right after the other. The first one on preservation and legal hold. The second one on review. And then there's going to be a half an hour of chat and networking. The last thing is just a series of housekeeping items. So kCura is a partner of ours and has been just a wonderful support through our growth. We have a kCura table where you can go get demos of Muffet and talk to folks. And the kCura folks here are Andrew, Josh, where's Brad? And Brad. So go find them if you need help. Can folks from SFL Data stick their hands up? If you want to know anything about SFL Data, talk to these guys. We're going to record this session, so we'll make that available. It's an MCLE event, so if you want MCLE credits, sign up at the table. The valet parking, if anyone had tried to find parking around here, congratulations if you managed it. The valet parking is complimentary, so we'll validate that for you. Go see, I guess, Nuala for that. Then it works. There's an iPad mini drawer at the end, which is a shameless way of making sure everyone stays till the end. So even if this is mind-numbingly boring, don't go because you might get an iPad mini. And then last thing is questions. We thought a lot about the panels and how to run them and how to make them really engaging and fast-moving, because I've sat through many legal techs and ILTAs and pretty much fallen asleep. So we've thought a lot about that stuff. One of the most important things is that we get good questions from you guys. So if you with questions, like stick your hands up, ask them at the appropriate time, or feel free to feed them into Nuala. She's got a fishbowl, she'll keep them and she'll get them to Dan. And last thing of all, this whole event is a Nuala show. So lady in the blue jacket, big thanks to Nuala.
Thank you, Nuala.
And over to Dan.
Thanks, Christian. Well, I rarely have heard an introduction where you're warned about the material being mind-numbingly boring. However, and that used to be the nature of this topic. It just seems like in the last few years, this topic has gotten very exciting. And there's an awful lot that's been written and spoken about on this topic, certainly within the legal community, but more recently among judges and court decisions as well. And it's become, I think, what we all have to acknowledge, a significant pain point for corporations of all stripes, and not only here in the United States, but abroad as well, people doing business here. It's had a huge impact. So what we're going to do on this panel, this first panel, is to talk about litigation holds and document preservation, which is, of course, a pretty important part of the puzzle, and it is a predicate for our second panel. So that's the way we teed this up. Let me just make a couple of preliminary comments about the topic, and then we can hear from our panelists in their views about various dimensions to the litigation hold and preservation issues. In the Gibson Dunn 2011 mid-year eDiscovery update, the conclusion was that there are about 187 cases in this area, and the number of eDiscovery decisions during this period of time now rose 82%. From the prior period, and the number of cases seeking sanctions doubled from prior years. Again, this is part of the pain point for corporations. And a similar report from Kroll on Track found that 67% of eDiscovery sanctions that they analyzed involved preservation issues and spoliation issues. Again, issues of significant concern to corporations. So courts are today now quite frequently requiring more than just issuing hold notices by mail. You really do need to have a complete litigation hold process, and one that is justifiable in court. That includes soliciting acknowledgments from custodians, issuing periodic reminders, the legal department really working closely with all the document custodians to be sure that they thoroughly understand what the litigation hold demands, and continuing that consultation or advisory the sessions throughout the litigation hold period. This is something that is a change, definitely a change in practice. It requires a lot more support from the litigation lawyers, the legal departments, and outside counsel. The preservation aspect of eDiscovery is also changing. Data sources, of course, as we know, are becoming really much more voluminous and complex than ever before, with lots of different document types, unstructured data. You've got collaborative platforms like wikis, social media causing all types of complexity. And the policies that a lot of the IT, the CIOs and the IT officials and corporations have adopted, really of necessity, the BYOD, or bring your own device policies that corporations have now are introducing a lot of personal equipment, personal networks, personal accounts to the eDiscovery challenge that corporations face. So lots of complexity in this area, so it is really timely to discuss just kind of where we are with respect to the court decisions and also the best practice that corporations are observing. So we've assembled a panel of experts today to explore some of these issues. And what I would like to do is I'll introduce them as they speak, so I won't do it right this minute, but I'm going to ask them to speak for a few minutes on a specific topic in this area. And then after we go through the panel, we'll have some conversation among the panel. And then at the end of that segment, what we'll do is we'll open the floor for questions and conversations among the panel. and hopefully tease out some of the complexity of this issue. So with that as background, and I therefore would ask that you hold your questions until that last segment of the program, and we will take as many as we possibly can. So let me start by introducing Matt Kahn. Matt is a senior associate in the San Francisco office of Gibson Dunn, and his practice focuses on securities and derivative litigation and class action defense. Matt is a member of his firm's Electronic Discovery and Information Law Group, and was selected as a Northern California Rising Star by Super Lawyers magazine in 2012. Prior to Gibson Dunn, he clerked for a federal judge, Judge Mary Cooper, in the Federal District in New Jersey, and he received his law degree, I'm happy to say, from Stanford Law School, and did his undergraduate work at Swarthmore College. So, Matt, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks everyone for having me.
So, Matt, can you give us your assessment of some of the risks associated with litigation hold and document preservation? And also, perhaps, could you highlight for us some of the applicable case law in this area? So, for example, could you talk about the timing issues? What triggers a legal hold? And also, what form should the legal hold take? And what obligations are there on counsel to follow up once the legal hold has been issued?
Sure, thanks, Dan. And I think you've really hit upon kind of three of the main risks or maybe pitfalls that companies and counsel face when dealing with litigation holds. On the timing issue, when do you send it out? This is something that comes up in a lot of cases, including this year. One side is always claiming that the other side didn't get their hold out in time, and it's often reciprocal. You see defendants claiming that plaintiffs haven't done it at the right time as well. The problem is that unless a lawsuit hits your desk and you had no clue that it was coming, which almost never is the case, there's this continuum of time where you could issue the hold, but you're not sure, but maybe there's going to be a lawsuit, you don't know. And the test is, when is it reasonably foreseeable that litigation is going to occur? And you're making that decision in real time, and it's going to be judged 3 or 4 years later by a court with the benefit of hindsight. And so that's a real difficult decision to be making. Courts have tried to add a little bit of certainty. The Federal Circuit last year in the Hynix and the Micron cases clarified that reasonably foreseeable doesn't mean that it's imminent. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's certain to occur without any contingencies being fulfilled. So it has to go out before then, but I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around when exactly you need to issue the hold. On the form issue, your hold could be oral, it could be written, it could be an informal email, it could be a detailed, thorough legal memo. And that decision isn't made in a vacuum. I think as outside counsel, we always like to see a big, detailed, thorough, thought-out memo, but as I just mentioned, you've got a timing problem. You might need to get that hold out right away, and you might feel a pressure to get out immediately some type of communication. Of course, the problem with doing something informal or doing something oral is that if 2 or 3 years down the road you're in court trying to defend yourself, that's a lot less defensible than maybe a more formal memo. I do think it's worth noting, though, that a couple years ago there was this movement led by Judge Shinlin in the Pension Committee case to make oral litigation holds basically forbidden. I think her words were gross negligence per se. And there's been a movement away from that the past couple years ago, and courts have recognized, for example, that an oral litigation hold actually might be appropriate, for example, in a very small company. And actually, just this year, the Second Circuit in the Chin case went out of its way to abrogate Judge Shinlin's holding in the Pension Committee case, and so that's no longer the law.
Her ruling did seem a bit mechanical, didn't it?
Yeah.
Laying down an absolute law that didn't have the flexibility, I think, that many judges feel is required here.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's that recognition of the flexibility. And a lot of courts are saying, well, the oral hold was inapplicable in this case and you shouldn't have done it here. But nevertheless, they're not saying it's per se gross negligence. I think one of the most interesting risks right now the courts have been focusing on a lot, especially in the Apple versus Samsung case that most people here are probably familiar with, is this obligation to follow up on the litigation hold. As one court said this year, issuing a litigation hold is just the beginning. And counsel has an obligation, inside and outside counsel, to follow up with custodians, to monitor the hold's implementation, to make sure that everyone understands what the obligations are. The problem, though, is that courts say that, and then they don't really explain what that means. And so, for example, Judge Shinlin and other courts have said, well, you have to follow up with the key custodians. But that just begs the question of what is a key custodian and what type of follow-up is required. Is it in-person interviews? Can you gather everyone in a room like this and not let them leave until the iPad mini drawing? It's not clear. And so I think that's another risk. The one thing I would point out, though, is that one thing that is clear in terms of follow-up is if there's an auto-deletion policy, that needs to be addressed. And most of the cases that I've seen this year and last year dealing with sanctions in this area are where the party, after issuing the litigation hold, didn't turn off the auto-deletion policy.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, auto-deletion policies, which of course are a good idea, in general, to reduce the archive of documents that would be available for search, can really bite you in the tail in a big way, and I think the Apple case certainly demonstrates that. Okay, let me introduce Sylvie Stulik. Sylvie works as a senior litigation paralegal for Electronic Arts, and she's been at EA for more than 10 years and began her career at the law firm of Patton, Wohl and Boxer. She's heavily involved, understandably, in her company's eDiscovery process, and that includes, of course, litigation holds and document preservation. And she works with the in-house legal team closely to identify custodians and source service providers and evaluate various technology solutions. So, Sylvie, could you talk about some of the fundamental, some of the practical aspects here of document holds?
So, we're not a huge company. I mean, I think, you've got your big Hewlett-Packards and stuff, but we're a good mid-sized company, and we've got almost 10,000 employees worldwide. When we get a lawsuit that hits our desk, it's really hard sometimes, unless there's a specific product that's named, to figure out exactly who you need to put on hold. And trying to kind of do it in what seems to be a timely manner, or should be, where you think you get a lawsuit and within a week you should really have sort of your list of custodians and you should get your hold out, sometimes is not reality. It takes a week just to find one person that you can ask and say, hey, who actually deals with this stuff? And then you get the runaround for another week, and next thing you know, at least for me, because I'm the only one who deals with this, another lawsuit has hit your desk, and that's a little bit more pointed, so you're dealing with that, and the lawsuit that has 20 products listed and with some obscure little piece of technology that you can't even figure out what it is, kind of sits on your desk for a little bit. And I always struggle with that, because I feel a sense of panic, like, oh my God, it's been a month, I haven't sent out a hold. And then I go back and forth, because in reality, for us, our technology documents don't get purged. I mean, our custodians keep it all, because it's what we do. We make games. Our technology, the technology that goes with the games, stays there. It doesn't get deleted. What gets lost could be possible custodian data, which, on a copyright case or something like that, it might be crucial and important, and those are usually very pointed, so you know exactly who your custodians are. And where I'm talking about are the patent cases from, where they list 20 games and it's just about the technology. Somewhere we have that information, we have that data. It's just not, you just don't know exactly who has it, and so trying to find that out is hard. And so, in practice for me, trying to get a holdout is painful sometimes, and you just have to deal with it. And I'm always fighting with outside counsel, because they keep coming back, have you sent out the hold? No, I haven't, because I can't figure out, we're still working on it. And so I start doing it on a rolling basis, and for me, doing it on a rolling basis, sort of, I feel like I'm kind of meeting my obligations. I know that maybe some outside counsel may not feel that way, but sometimes that's just the best that you can do. You just have to I think as long as you're trying to find the right people, and you're not leaving it just sitting there and not doing anything about it. We haven't, knock on wood, been called on that.
Sylvie, we'll have follow-up questions in just a minute, but let me kind of go out of turn here to ask you a question about when you send out a litigation hold to one of your custodians, presumably you also accompany that with some counseling about what it means and what obligations they have as a result. Do you do any broader training of the workforce about what a litigation hold means and what the impact might be?
We don't.
So you just do it as the litigation hold is issued. Do you feel that's effective?
It's effective. It's effective to the people that matter. So, our holds can be broad because we are dealing with, various technologies. We end up hitting, an engineer who really doesn't have a whole lot to do with it, but, might have touched upon it a little bit. And so they tend to sort of not get it. But, if you hit a producer or a technical director who actually is invested in it, they actually do read it. And they are interested in it, and they get it, and, they do come back with questions. A lot of times is, why are we the ones getting sued? Everybody else does this, but it's, then they've read it at least, and they they understand what they have to do.
They understand it when they get it.
Yes.
What about 6 months later, when the hold is still in effect?
6 months later, unfortunately, we don't follow up. We don't have that capability or manpower. I'm the only one who does this, so I can't go back to every single case I've put a hold on and kind of check up on everybody. But, as the case moves forward, we're always in touch with those people who do matter, so they do understand that there is that obligation. We also, as soon as we put out a hold, we automatically take people off the auto-delete policy for their email. And then we actively go out and collect their data as soon as we put them on hold, so that at least we have that part preserved at the beginning. We have their email preserved, we have their computer data preserved, and they're off the auto-delete policy. So, what we risk losing is from the time we've put it on hold until, when we start searching for the documents. But our custodians actually don't like to delete anything, so it's very surprising when I come up with someone and they're like, oh, well, I don't have that anymore because I deleted it. And it's always, oh, no, I have it somewhere. I'll find it.
Okay, let me introduce Sushi Somasakar. Sushi serves as the senior consultant at SFL Data, working in forensics and collections. That is data, document collections. Since joining SFL Data, she worked for 6 years as an IP litigation associate at the Oric firm and has her career experience in software engineering. So really kind of a technical expert as well. So we're fortunate to have Sushi. Sushi, could you talk a little bit, following up on Sylvie's comments, on the challenges around the identification of data sources and custodians?
Thank you, Dan. As Dan mentioned, the number and complexity of data sources are ever expanding. A few years ago, we used to see a custodian's laptop, email, maybe documents on the network share. Now we see cloud storage on file sharing services like Dropbox, social media like Facebook, collaboration workspaces, and numerous other type of devices. Courts are routinely allowing discovery into social media. A judge in Tennessee even asked the witnesses to accept his friend request on Facebook so he could conduct an in-camera review of the photographs in question. So that seems to be, courts are moving towards allowing broad discovery into social media. In the recent EEOC versus original honey-baked ham case, the court allowed very broad discovery, asking the plaintiffs to turn over access to all their social media accounts, usernames, and password. So the courts are still grappling a little bit with the scope of discovery in terms of privacy, if there is any privacy interest in social media accounts. Some courts allowing broad discovery and some tightening it up a little bit. Recently, Twitter was compelled to produce documents related to a Occupy Wall Street protest occupant. And so all these increasingly discoveries being allowed into these social media sites. Another trend that we see is Dan, people using their personal social media accounts like LinkedIn for work purposes. A couple of interesting cases, more dealing with ownership, one of a Twitter account and one of a LinkedIn account, where employees were using their personal account for work-related marketing and other work-related services. And there's now an ownership dispute between a former employee and the former employer over who owns the social media account. Gartner has predicted that one of the top 5 IT trends for 2013 is going to be an increase in BYOD, bring your own devices, as corporations attempt to cut down their cost. So this fuzzy line between what devices and accounts people are using for work and personal needs are complicating our job of identifying relevant sources. Another thing that we are increasingly seeing is employees keeping a lot of work documents on cloud storage like Dropbox or SugarSync. People have Dropbox folders in their work computer, in their home computer, and on their personal devices. Many companies don't have a standard policy. Some of them might freely allow it. So it's important to know where all the data resides and what is a company policy. So not only is data getting big, but it's getting heterogeneous, it's getting scattered and dispersed across multiple devices and sources. From a litigation hold perspective, it's important that one considers all these sources early on and get a good idea of where all the data is. And depending on the context of the claims and defenses in the case, social media typically seems to come up more often in employment cases or in personal injury. It's relevant to damages. You're claiming you can't walk, but there's a picture of you skiing on Facebook. So social media comes more in those contexts. Maybe it's not so relevant in a patent case. So depending on the claims and defenses, you definitely want to try to identify all the various sources while considering your litigation hold. And more courts are requiring more and more cooperation from counsel. Northern District just adopted the new guidelines on eDiscovery, and cooperation and meet and confers early on to identify what sources you want to preserve is a big theme that they are encouraging parties to do. In terms of identification, I might be running out of time. Just a couple of things. There are a couple of recent cases that have actually held that there's an obligation to preserve documents with third parties, like consultants and independent agents, if the facts show that you have practical or legal ability to obtain documents. So don't forget to consider third parties who may have documents relevant. And about identifying custodians, there's no necessity to cast the net super wide. There are consequences to over-preservation. So it might be possible to have some kind of strategizing priority custodians ahead and preserving more from them, and maybe a targeted preservation for employees of lower importance. And again, cooperation is the key, and it may be possible to reach out to the other side, exchange a list of custodians, have an agreement in place in terms of what is being preserved.
Oh, that's great, Sushi. Thank you. And hopefully we can touch on this when we get to the panel discussion, but with the use of a lot of personal devices, a lot of accounts that are up in the cloud, the various uses of social media, Sushi, that you were talking about, the privacy issues that intersect now with document collection and preservation are daunting for a corporation. Because it's the same challenge that our criminal authorities are facing. Of course, they're looking at it with a different set of rules coming from the court than we're looking at it from the civil side. But privacy issues in data collection really are going to be a very hot topic in 2013, I would predict, because the law is so unsettled and the stakes are so high and important, both in the criminal context as well as in civil litigation. Let's turn to Andy Crane. Let me introduce Andy. Andy provides expert witness and strategic consulting services to law firms and corporate clients in the areas of of computer forensics and investigations, electronic discovery, litigation support, and he is an attorney, both an attorney and a private investigator. And his case experience includes legal areas such as theft of trade secrets, spoliation of evidence, internal investigations, employment disputes, regulatory inquiries, and fraud. And he's provided testimony as a computer forensics expert in declarations and depositions and at trial. So, Andy, with your background, can you add something to the discussion we've already had about some of the important elements of effective litigation hold management? And can you give us, in your assessment, a high-level overview of some of the software solutions that are available in the marketplace on litigation holds and document preservation?
Sure, great, Dan, thanks. A couple probably loose end points around effective management in this area. One that comes to mind that hasn't been mentioned for me, it kind of dovetails with Matt's comments about the auto-delete policy and how that was brought to light so much in the Apple-Samsung matter. But in my experience, a simple thing that I see cause a ton of repetitive pain is lost and repurposed assets. I worked on a case a couple of years ago where literally 6 figures was spent on legal fees and motion practice, experts sort of dueling it out over a CEO's former laptop that the hard drive broke. And the IT guy, after trying to fix it, eventually just discarded it. And the other side went ballistic. What do you mean? You threw away the CEO's laptop. You must be hiding the key documents here. It grew even more absurd after the IT guy and the CIO were deposed and said, there's nothing unique on our laptops anyways. And the CEO was deposed and said, I'm a CEO. I don't create documents. I review documents. I accept calendar invites. Everything in my world is in my email, right? Which is all server-based. But this went on. This was trial testimony, right? And the side got clobbered. So I see this over and over that, especially when you've got lots of custodians, lots of overlapping holds, people are going to get upgraded equipment or equipment is going to fail. It's easy enough to think, oh, that one's broken, or he got a new one and we migrated all the data across. That's not necessarily setting yourself up in a safe position once you get into the sort of real contentious motion practice of litigation. So really buttoning down those lost or repurposed assets, I think goes right along with auto-delete as sort of a practical thing. One other comment that I'd add that sort of fills in some of the other panelists' comments are, and this is sort of pursuant to these expanding data sources, is especially with this bring your own device stuff, think about on these tablets and these phones, really the unique source of data is probably SMS, the text messaging. And these companies that have either by sort of deliberate effort or just by sort of the free-form culture, you've got, I think Matt could probably attest, when you do these custodian interviews, you say, now look at me carefully. You don't use SMS for business purposes, right? That, because from the collection side, from the hold side, it's so ephemeral, it's not anywhere else. The tools to capture that stuff are less immature. All of the workflow and tools that we've established to deal with a lot of the typical data in eDiscovery still doesn't really work all that well for this text messaging data. And I guess I'd lump in there things like instant messaging logging, or Skype leaves a wonderfully detailed history behind of chatting and file transfers, etc. So those are a couple of the loose end points, and then quickly, Dan, on the software side, we try to keep an eye on a lot of these tools as they're emerging. There are ever more options available now. For people that are not so familiar with the sort of survey of software in the market, I'd put it in 2 buckets for you. If you're a corporation and you're thinking about a litigation hold software tool, you're going to either go in the first bucket, which I'll call on-premise, and in an attempt to be agnostic, I'll just sort of name these things like Xtero and Clearwell or PSS, and I think Guidance, and if I'm not mistaken, Autonomy are trying to build those functionalities in. But the concept here is a much bigger ticket spend, but the ability to do a lot more. It'll do the notification and the reminders and the reporting, the sort of notification management, if you will, but these tools also have the ability then to integrate with some of your enterprise systems behind the firewall and maybe even freeze or actually preserve data. On the other hand, the second major sort of bucket of litigation hold software solutions is software as a service. So this is the cloud stuff like Muffet, which you'll hear about in a second, or probably its most close competitor, Legal Hold Pro. So here you're looking at a much more minimal financial outlay, but the thing lives in the cloud. So just by definition, it's not going to freeze any data at your company or do some of this more advanced system integration. It's really just a productivity booster to help you get these things out. I mean, Sylvie explains it's hard enough to get them out. It's next to impossible for people to really stay on schedule with these reminders and tracking acknowledgments, et cetera, et cetera. One point about those, either of the two categories of tools that I think gets underappreciated is a lot of these tools have a custodian interview portal. The custodian gets the notification. They have to click some acknowledgement that they understand and they agree. And then there's the alternative to have them actually do a little sort of online interview. Do you have documents? You could rule a custodian out. Who else should we talk to? Do you use an external hard drive? You don't use SMS for business purposes. And I had a thought with Christian's comment that maybe at the end of that, you could say, by clicking acknowledgement, you'll be entered in a drawing to win an iPad mini at the end of the year. But the closing comment about these software tools is just sometimes people see the cost of this thing and they think, I don't know, is that worth it? And what I really encourage folks to do is evaluate the cost of that tool in light of the productivity boost you'll get, and Sylvie could probably be a very good illustration of that, but then also it probably only takes one case to end up in motion practice and you outspent the cost of the tool right there. So not to mention getting sanctioned or having share price drop or any of this other stuff that can happen when you get battered. So
Great. You know, Andy, when you talk about the cost of tools, and of course, as a former general counsel, I was very sensitive to cost, but the cost of the tool is only a fraction of the real cost of implementation. And this is something I think that the vendors need to understand. And it's one of the reasons why it's so difficult for a corporate law department to actually select the right software tool. If you think about how dynamic this market is, it's changing so fast, the standards are changing, the technology is changing. To decide to invest the money today commits you, for some period of time, maybe a couple of years, 2-3 years. Do you even want to be committed, locked in to a solution with all the accompanying training and so forth that's required when the market's changing that quickly and something better might come along next month?
And I think that's especially true with those on-premise solutions.
It's a huge challenge.
You
Yes,
really
absolutely.
are looking at a big total cost of ownership. It's
Yeah.
not just the sticker price, it's the machines and the people and the training and the maintenance where, I mean, again, to be agnostic, but those cloud and SaaS solutions, much less of a long-term commitment. And in fact, I think both of the two main tools in that space have kind of a test drive pricing model.
Excellent. This is a great segue.
You can run one.
This is a great segue. Let me introduce Josh Haas. And Josh is a member of kCura's emerging products group, and he helps move product ideas from conception to fruition. And he's going to talk a little bit about the method solution that Andy just mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. So really, I just want to talk about how method fits into this whole picture and hopefully consolidate some of the thoughts from the other panelists. And I think there's no question that legal hold is complex. I seem to hear a lot more about it in just general news today. And as data grows, the problem only worsens. So what we did a couple years ago is, we saw the opportunity to take a lot of this manual work that's being done and get those productivity boosts, right? So we took a Relativity platform and built out a legal hold management tool. So what this does is it sits in that notification world, right? Starting out with sending questionnaires, perhaps, to do some risk assessment. How do I find out who has what and where? So then I can prioritize a list of custodians, send that off to my forensics guys, and they can do the collection piece, right? Then they're sending out notices. So making sure people get the notice, acknowledge the notice. So oftentimes I've heard people describe it in terms of, until you get acknowledgement in the eyes of the court, you may as well not have even sent the notice. So to be extreme in my language there. And then there's the idea of automating. How do we take the one person and let them do this across multiple cases, multiple holds, while scheduling those reminders to go out over the course of 5 years. If you ask me what I was doing 2 months ago, I'm going to have a really hard time describing. In this project specifically, I was working with this data, and I need to remember where I put it. So by scheduling these reminders, maybe sending follow-up questionnaires, you have that interaction. You're not having to do it manually, and it's all coming back to one centralized location. So really, again, think 2 years down the road, I need to come back and review, well, who all was using a BlackBerry? Who all has a personal laptop that they use for work purposes? Go in, filter that sort, and then follow up from there. So this launch pad to really help you understand where your data is, who has it, and where you need to take action. So that's the crux of what Method really does. In addition to that, everything's audited. So you can see who answered which question, which way, who hasn't acknowledged. So if you have 3 people who didn't acknowledge a notice, you can really quickly get to that information and know who you need to follow up with. If you need to escalate that to someone's supervisor, whatever the workflow you've created is, you can get to that information faster. So you're not reinventing the wheel every single time there's a new hold. If you've done this once, you can take that workflow, transfer it over, have your questionnaire templates, all that standard language that's in a notice that's being used over and over again, get it out to people, clicking a couple buttons instead of setting up the workflow manually every single time. And the thought is that you have this linear standard workflow that you can follow and set up, but you're being defensible by doing that. What's reasonable anticipation mean in litigation? There's a lot of gray area there. If you have everything set up and pulling the trigger to actually execute and issue the hold is as much as then just sending out the notice or the questionnaires, you're in a lot better position than having to retroactively go back and create this on the fly with all the time pressure of litigation, impending. And then once you're questioned, someone says, well, you didn't get acknowledgments from all of your custodians. Well, you can pull up a report and throw that on the desk and say, well, yes, we did, and here are all the custodians, here's when we sent out the notices, here's the questions we were asking them. So it's really easy to prove what you've done and not have discrepancy in he said, she said, or I have a bunch of emails, or I have this Excel spreadsheet that I was tracking this in. So that's really where we're going with Method and where it fits into all of this.
Yeah, Sylvie, let me ask you, actually, having now heard from Josh about this Method solution, how would this solve some of the issues that you were describing?
Oh, I mean, it would definitely solve the manual aspect of sending out emails, and then keeping track of those emails. So for us, until just recently, we had been doing a manual legal hold process. I would send out all the legal hold emails. I would ask for replies back. I would send those emails on to one of our admins who input it into an Excel spreadsheet. I never go back and look at the spreadsheet, unfortunately, and see who hasn't responded and who has, because I just moving on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. And then as far as trying to figure out, whose data we need to collect and when they've left, and all that has been manual as well. We get a preterm Excel spreadsheet from our HR department. We compare that to our Excel spreadsheet. There's a lot of issues there because, the admin could, type John with a J-O-N instead of J-O-H-N. And, well, there goes that custodian because they've left and we don't even know about it. So, a tool like Method definitely would help keep track of sort of who you sent it out to, when they reply, and then you can go ahead and do the follow-up. You can send, you can easily get out a report, I assume, with all your custodians, with their names correctly spelt out. Then you could take it, and compare it to that Excel spreadsheet that you get from HR. So those kind of tools are reasonably priced tool for a really good sort of management solution. I decided a long time ago that wasn't just the only thing I wanted out of my legal hold tool. So I actually went in-house, brought something in-house, and we have something that goes and flows with our collection tool, so that we can eventually integrate it also with our people management tool, so everything will be automated. It will be, the reporting will be done easily. We'll get our HR tool telling us this person's left. It'll compare it to our legal hold. We'll get a notification saying, hey, this person's leaving, and we'll go ahead and collect. So,
Is this something that's been done, or are you planning to do it?
so we've got it halfway done.
Halfway done?
We
Because you're using the future tense, so I'm a little
We've
skeptical.
We've implemented the legal hold tool portion. Our HR department's also changing out their people management tool, so they're going
Yeah.
live with it, so they say, in January. So as soon as they go live, then we will integrate our tool
Okay.
into that.
You're really illustrating my point that I was making earlier about how the cost of the tool itself is just a fraction of the total cost to a legal department of implementing something like this.
And for me to
It's
get
massive.
sleep.
And, you're right. Let me direct the question, Matt, to you and also to Sushi, which has to do with what are the risks of preservation of documents from a legal perspective first, and then Sushi, maybe you talk about it from a more practical dimension. Matt?
Sure. So I think the risks of over-preservation are really kind of twofold. One is the obvious cost aspect of it. I mean, if you are preserving all of this data, maybe you might think, oh, okay, well, it's just this one case, it's not going to last that long, and then it ends up lasting 20 years, and you have just mountains of data you have to pay to store that. And then the other side is, in future litigations, if another law firm suing you recognizes that you have that data from the other litigation, they'll just keep coming at you. Oh, well, don't you have that repository from that case? And then it just kind of becomes this never-ending cycle. And so that's definitely the risks there.
But when you have lawsuits that have broad allegations, you already have this problem of, retaining a very large repository, which now is, it's like an attractive target for other plaintiffs to come after you. The problem already exists. Sushi, from a practical aspect.
Sure, cost is one, as Matt just
Cost
mentioned.
is very
Cost is
practical.
one, slowing down of the business as a whole. Things are less efficient when you have more data stored. And you have to look through more data for collection. It might mean that you're just spending a lot of time looking at a lot of irrelevant data to get what you want when you have preserved more. And Andy, anything more to add?
Well, I think that probably just dovetails with there's sort of two schools of thought with some of this. Once you've got these hold notices out, as you think about a preservation strategy, there's certain people and environments that advocate, I think, what they call preservation in place, which is notify folks, follow up, but let it sit until we have to do something with it. And then other folks, I think, really believe in the idea of collect to preserve. And Sylvie talked about that with, once we've identified these custodians and given them a notice, we're going to go get the stuff, because now we're not relying on them quite so much. And the common argument I hear against that preservation in place is something that Suchi touched on, which is just especially with big sort of enterprise production systems, that can really burden these systems. These systems that are database systems or something that are supposed to be sort of purging stuff off the back all the time, and then you are basically sort of handcuffing the system and you're handcuffing the business in light of this, and you're doing it indefinitely.
Gosh, I guess it was back in the early 2000s, maybe 10 years ago or so, that the formulation of document retention policies were all the rage. and every company needed to have a document retention policy, which of course we recognize in some respects was a bit of a euphemism for document destruction policy. And now it's really become very complex because for corporations such as the one for which I was general counsel, large corporations which are sued regularly, there really is no time when there isn't a suit pending that will really challenge senior management documents in particular, the custodians about whom you're most concerned. So there really isn't an opportunity to delete those records. So I guess I was fortunate in my career to serve at the dawn of the information age, so we didn't really have to deal with this. But what kind of advice would you give to a general counsel going forward? Because, I mean, what we're doing is gaining these repositories of documents. They're really enormous archives. And although I guess storage costs are still cheap enough that it's not a massive intrusion on your budget, this can't last forever. So where are we going with all of this? When is there an opportunity to delete records? And I'll just ask the panel generally, whoever wants to jump in there.
Well, I guess I'll make a comment there, which is that I guess is a sense an argument for collect to preserve. And I think something that would be interesting for folks on this topic is I've been seeing a little bit more literature around what people are calling defensible deletion. And in fact, that eDiscovery journal is running a survey right now. And all the survey respondents are saying, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We should do it. But then they're saying, well, are you actually doing it? And how are you doing it? And what are you doing it? And the answers get a lot thinner. So you're exactly right that I think we've moved past the decade ago of, we got to get a retention policy in here. Now what I hear is, we got a retention policy, we got to implement it. So they haven't really come that far. But I think in some would be, my thought would be, both having your policies lined up so that when that sort of elusive window does present itself, between holds, you're ready to execute, as opposed to, let's start thinking about the solution in the time window. You're never going to get it done. And then look for those opportunities or right situations to collect to preserve stuff so that, ordinary destruction can continue to go on. Because I think there are certainly examples where taking an adequate time snapshot, collecting to preserve, and then move on, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hold everything indefinitely for the next 5 years.
To jump in on that from the legal hold standpoint, it probably goes without saying that closing a hold is equally as important as opening and issuing that notice. From the custodian's perspective, they might not be all that in with, what are the data retention destruction policies. They know they're on hold, and if, 6 months later, the hold should be closed, but they didn't receive that acknowledgement, they're still preserving data, and, they could be used down the road.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, Josh. That's an important point. But there still is this conundrum, again, for large companies that are continuously in litigation. There really is no opportunity, no intervening opportunity when things are just right. Now you can delete the documents.
Well,
it's a real challenge.
The other challenge I find for us for our retention policy is that we have this policy, but I don't know how many corporations out there actually have a way to enforce their policies. Unless you yourself go and do it. I mean, our group that deals with our retention policies is 2 people. They're not going to go and check with every department to make sure, and every person to make sure they have deleted everything they need to delete. There's no way to go ahead and audit that. And so you have this policy and you're holding yourselves to it, but in reality, your custodians are actually still keeping whatever it is they want to keep. So I always, part of me feels that when I say, oh no, we don't have emails, older than 90 days, because it gets deleted. Well, the truth of the matter is our custodians take it all and stick it on a PST and it's on their hard drive for 12
Absolutely.
years.
Or they print it out and put it in their files.
Right, and then so you're telling outside, opposing counsel, oh no, our policy is this, and then you go and search, and of course you have to get all these documents and emails that are older than this. I then feel like I'm lying, and so I'm starting to kind of feel that the trend should be more, this is our data deletion recommendation as opposed to our policy. Because I think if you say it's our recommendation, we recommend that you keep email or documents for X amount of time, barring all the financial and SOX and all that stuff, but, just your regular work documents. This is what we suggest, and it's up to you to do it, because we just have no way to enforce that.
Yeah.
I think that it's.
We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to open the floor for questions from the audience. Any questions that you'd like to ask our panel? Okay. You can arm wrestle.
So, how do you handle, significant HR changes or terminating employees, say for a large corporation, tens of thousands of people could be on hold?
Sure. So the way we integrate, it's via Exchange or LDAP, right, to suck in custodians. As far as keeping track of, people leaving, changing departments, it's a bit manual today in Muffet, just because of all of the changes that can be there. It's difficult to automatically update that and not overwrite something that you don't want to change. What's the historic impact of overriding someone's department if that the data from something they worked on before is part of a current hold. So today it's pretty manual.
But that's a pretty significant issue, because if a custodian changes and that person is responsible for something, somebody else has stepped in and your legal hold should go to the person.
Exactly, and that would fall on the hold, what we call the hold owner's shoulders. So whoever's executing the hold to be aware of those changes and note them in method and follow up.
Yeah.
So we've talked about certain legal events that are supporting a more deliberate way in managing holds, right? Whether it's through judicial opinion, sanctions, et cetera, right? So, and when it comes to, what are the expectations from when people ask, hey, are you doing everything within reason to manage this particular hold process? What are they looking for? Are they looking, hey, this is my workflow? Are they looking for that report? Is there any? Can you guys provide any specifics around that?
Yeah, I mean, is your question, what is a court looking for, or what is opposing counsel looking for? I mean, opposing counsel looking for whatever you will.
Handhold.
Yeah. And for a court, unfortunately, I think the answer is the court's looking for some type of indicia that you have taken reasonable steps under the circumstances, which is always going to vary. But I think if you think of it towards an eye towards making sure that nothing's been lost, rather than making sure that everything has been gathered. I think that's really what courts are most concerned about. I think that's why you see so much emphasis in the opinions on the auto deletion and the failure to timely issue a hold of some sort. Where you see more of the you have to talk to this specific person type of opinions and discussions is where you have a very large company, where it's a complex case, and where it really should have been obvious that you needed to go out and talk to these, but you can't just send an email blast to 3,000 people and expect that that's sufficient. One thing I will note, though, and I meant to make this point before, because courts are focused so much on cooperation right now among the parties, and this is reflected in the Northern District of California eDiscovery guidelines that just came out a couple weeks ago, what you're seeing on the litigation hold front is that courts are expecting parties to share this type of information with one another. And so you'll see courts requiring you to share what your litigation hold notice looks like and to talk about your follow-up efforts, and you see 30B6 depositions on this stuff all the time. And so I think one thing to keep in mind is that as you go into this process, you shouldn't necessarily assume that anything is going to remain privileged about this process, and it could well be part of the litigation. I think you need to keep that in mind as you go into this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to talk about the judge's antipathy towards spoliation issues. I mean, this is really a hot button issue, and I think deservedly so. I mean, that clearly is where their concern is greatest, because the practices for preserving are still kind of formative and changing, but spoliation is something that is a no-no and has historically been a no-no. That's not new, but because of the ubiquity of electronic data, it's become a lot easier to delete things. There was a hand up somewhere in the back. Yes, ma'am.
This is for Andy. BYOD policies.
It's too early for BYOB. So.
Policies, right? What are some key components from your perspective that will help ease the challenges for eDiscovery?
I think your computer use policy, first and foremost. The custodians over time and again, shocked and horrified. What do you mean you're going to copy my iPad? What do you mean you're copy my iPhone? And with that computer use policy is, and this is not so much a eDiscovery or lit hold thing, but an information security thing. And we've done this at SFL where we've implemented, I mean, our CTO isn't here today, but he says, I don't want to buy people $500 iPhones. I can buy them an $80 BlackBerry, but nobody wants to carry that thing anymore. So he says, fine, you can carry it, you can get your email on it, but it's got to be password protected and it's got to have remote wiping. That if you walk from the company, I can wipe that device to protect my data that you just walked out with. So it's that expectation management in computer use policy, and then like I said earlier, is the dream scenario with the mobile device, whether it's personally owned or whether it's company owned, is during identification and hold, we can say there's nothing unique on it. Doesn't matter, leave it out. I think that's the holy grail. And one in the back there, Dan.
But is there? Yes. I can't see you, but thank you. Thank you for standing.
I wondered about reminders for litigation holds. If you can talk about how much they're merely a best practice versus an actual obligation that courts have discussed.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of cases focusing on this. I've seen in passing courts saying it's a best practice and you should do it. But I think it's the rare case where a court says, wow, you just had the perfect, most amazing litigation hold initially, but then you didn't do a sufficient job following up. Usually if there hasn't been a sufficient job following up, there also hasn't been a sufficient initial litigation hold. I definitely think it's a best practice and a good idea. I also think that it's a benefit of an automated system, and I haven't used Method, but an automated system is great because it will remember for you. I think the biggest challenge with legal hold implementation is that it's usually no one's job to think 100% of the time about the legal hold. And so you start out with the best of intentions. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other thing, and then you're on to the next thing and no one's thinking about it until it's too late. So having that automated system there to participate and be the one who thinks about it all the time is helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a best practice and kind of a bonus. I mean, your goal here. I think Andrew's question was good to Matt about kind of all these different things. Like, what are we looking for? In my mind, it's nail the timing on that trigger, because that's really where people get in trouble. And unfortunately, there's just not going to be some sort of concrete rule-based guidance about that trigger. So it's going to be this first word you hear in law school, which is reasonable. The cooperation really helps build that record of reasonableness. And I think if you've got reminders as part of your program, I mean, you're timely, you're written, you're doing reminders, and you can render reporting, you're in as good a position as you can basically get into.
One thing I would like to add about the follow-ups is where I think you could see there be an obligation is where the litigation is not just about retrospective events, but there are still ongoing events. And if, for example, you've got a securities litigation where there was a disclosure that X was happening, but there could well be a disclosure that Y was happening too coming, then that's the type of situation where I think you'd be more likely to have a requirement of a follow-up.
Well, good. Well, I think we're kind of at the end of time. I'm going to have to ask you a question perhaps to the panel afterwards. So we've talked about how the law has evolved. We've talked about how best practices have evolved, although perhaps more slowly. And I think we're left with the feeling that the problem still looms very large. And there's going to be a lot of developments here in this area certainly in the next year or two, so follow closely. I want to thank the panel for really excellent presentations and discussion. Thank you very much.